I'm ChosenArchitect, and this is all the mods 9 to the sky. Now, getting started today, power is going to be a big part of today's episode because we need to scale up our power to allow us to get access to an SPS and actually use it properly. But not only do we need it for our SPS that we'll eventually be setting up, we also are going to need it to really ramp up the speed on our seed production from mystical agriculture using these phytogrows and utilizing the max tier upgrades that we can put inside the augment slots. Once we start making those upgrades, well, these things are going to really start consuming some power, up into the thousands per machine. And I thought potentially changing the moderators out for unobtainium in this pack inside of our bigger reactors would help. But all it did was actually bring up the power factor by just 5,000 RF per tick. That was it. It just brought it up by 5,000 more RF, which is not a whole lot. And so really our main power gen is only producing about 640,000 RF per tick, give or take. But today we're going to change that. We're going to be producing millions of RF today. And so how are we going to do that today? Well, we're going to jump even deeper into the Powah mod. And much like the theme of all of our other episodes, we're going to be going a little bit overkill today. And each one of these platforms here are going to contain multiple Powah reactors. Now, thankfully, these reactors are not as complex and hard to set up like the fission reactor is. They are way simpler to do. Now, in order to craft these reactors, we have to go through all of the prerequisite crafts to get up all the way to nitro. Of course, you can start this at any time in your journey, so long as you have one key component, and that is uraninite. And at this point, I don't have any uraninite. I've not set up crafting recipes for it, and I haven't set up seeds for it. And the way that you can get yourself some uraninite is by utilizing an energizing orb in order to send regular uranium to it to produce it. And this is going to be a pretty nifty and simple way of doing this. However, as soon as we get some, I definitely want to make seeds for this. That is going to be the ultimate way of producing enough uraninite for as many reactors as I'm going to be setting up today. Now, of course, these reactors do require some other items that we're going to get into very shortly, and some other sort of automations that we're also going to need to have set up to get these to work. And not only to work, but to work in the most efficient way possible. Now, honestly, nothing is more satisfying than watching this actively do its craft. Oh, it is just so satisfying watching all the items just rush in and out. Now, I've been meaning to set up this automation for a while, and I'm going to use this as perfect use case. I'm going to be crafting a ton of seeds throughout this series, and we're getting to the point now where seed crafting is going to be very important. So what I want to do is I want to automate our infusion altar for the seed crafting. So to do this, I'm going to use a modular router to send one side of items, so 4 items here and 4 items on the other side, and we'll tell that where it's going to go here in a moment. Then we're going to need to send the base seed into this, and then we need a modular router to receive the product. So in setup, we have these set up nice and neat. So what we're going to do is use some distribution modules and making sure they're transferring out of the router. And we're going to select 4 individual places. And I like to be fancy with this. I'm just going to select this one, this one, this one, and this one for right now. That one will end up going here. So that way anything that goes in this buffer will get evenly distributed into those 4 places. And then for the other distribution module, making sure it's also set to output, I'm going to select the other ones. Because all of these seed crafts just require 4 of each individual type, whether that's 4 individual items or it's also 4 of the essences. And I'm going to put that one over here. So some speed upgrades, of course, will help. But to be able to set up the middle section, we're going to need a sender to send the base seed into this. And so that's very simple. That should just go right there. So I place the base seed in here. That'll put it here. And then the output, believe it or not, will be able to be pulled out of here. I don't think we have to select the bottom. I'm just going to select the bottom just to make sure. But I am going to select the bottom because I know you can hopper out of here and you don't even have to filter this thing, which is nice. I'm going to use a puller upgrade for that. Basically sending wirelessly into our output, which will be this one right here. So if all is said and done, we should now be able to take our mystical agriculture essence, place them in here, place one in here, and this should all craft up. And so to be able to show this off, if I place, for example, the supremium essence in here, notice it all gets placed in. And then on this side, I can place the uraninite, and then I can just place in all of my seeds here. And for however many we have, it should finish the craft just like that. Send the item then back over here, and there's our seed done. So we can do like multiple in one go, which is what makes this so powerful. Now, along with our uraninite seeds, I'm also going to want to make probably a few ice seeds as well. And like I said, it just doesn't get any easier. It doesn't really matter which side you put what in, just so long as you have all of the appropriate ingredients and make sure you evenly distribute it properly. And for me, this is going to make seed crafting incredibly fast. You know what? To keep the cool look of the floor and everything, I'm going to utilize the camouflage upgrades, right click on this personal barrel, and I want to use its texture inside of the modular router. And notice, by the way, it will take on that texture, giving it a very nice look here in the floor that looks like a barrel. I'm going to come back to later why we are probably going to end up needing a bunch of ice seeds, but we also are going to need the rest of these placed in. So I'm going to go ahead and get the uraninite started to process, because of course that's the main fuel. We're also going to need coal for this setup, but we're also going to need some special kind of things set up with this ice. That is, of course, if we want to set up the max operation efficiency for these reactors. And so now, after getting all of that prerequisite stuff set up, I can now start to actually make my nitro reactors. And we're going to need 36, I believe, of each one, because this is a 3x4x3 structure. So getting this thing started crafting requires a ton of steps. So each one of these does take a significant amount of time, especially since we're going to need to be crafting, for example, like these nitro crystals and so on. And this is where it might be a good idea for me to actually make the seeds for each individual crystal. But I also got to keep in mind that each one of those seeds are going to cost an entire block of this material. Not just a block, a compressed block. Now that I have all of my blocks required for this, all 36, now I can show you what makes this so fantastic. I don't have to build this by hand. I just simply need to right click, and it's just going to place the entire reactor for me. It's so good. It's so nice. And as soon as it's done, bam, it will form the multi-block. Now, the idea for my setup here is I technically want to have multiples of these inside here. Now, my actual goal for this is to place down at least 4 of these machines, or we could do 3 per individual platform. Of course, the more reactors we have, well, the more power we're going to produce. And I still don't know what the actual max power is that this can even produce in this particular pack, but we're about to find out because we're going to start setting this up. Now, on this interface, we have a few different things to look at. We have this slot, doesn't really tell us anything what these slots do, but if we hover over this bar, we can see this says carbon, and of course carbon's coal. This says redstone, so we're gonna have to give it redstone, which is interesting, and then some sort of coolant. Now, when it says coolant, we're gonna need to feed it regular water, and thankfully it actually doesn't use any of that water. You just give it the amount of water it needs, and then it's good to go. But it does require a solid coolant. And remember earlier I was talking about the need for ice seeds. Well, this is where it is going to come into play, because the best coolant that you can put in here is dry ice, which is made from the Powah mod. And dry ice requires a bunch of blue ice in order to produce. So this is going to be nice that we can actually fill these reactors up, and we can have a crafter that's constantly sending this, and it doesn't consume it super fast. But it does require, like I said, a lot of blue ice, as you can see here. And so now having those ice seeds all set up is going to make this process very, very trivial. So for setting up the water, I think we can just right click fluid into this. There we go. And that's actually all we're ever going to need. It doesn't like drain any of this water. We just need to keep the water in here. But for everything else, we are going to need to pipe this in. So I have my wireless connector that's connected into here. So we have a few channels to play with. And what I want to do is just extend it out here. You don't have to. I think you can literally put this anywhere on here, but we'll use an export bus. And so this is where we're going to send it a few different items. For example, the redstone. And I think inside of here, do we have redstone blocks automated? We do. So it's best to send it all block form. So we'll send redstone blocks. We'll also send coal blocks. All of these things definitely worth setting up and making sure you have autocrafts for. And we're also going to need to send it dry ice, which I do have an autocraft now set up for. And finally, the uraninite. So all of these individual items we need to send in here, and then just make sure we have a crafting card. And that should start to place all of these items that are requested inside of the machine. And then we want to flip this to export in round robin mode. So that should now start to send round robin each of those individual items, and we should now be able to start to see how much power this thing can actually generate. Now it looks like it can store up to 500 million FE inside of its buffer, and I recommend turning on the auto mode, which will basically allow this to shut off once it hits a certain amount. But it looks like it's generating about 65,000 FE per tick, which is very, very good for something as small as this. So if we take that math into consideration, let's just assume the base number is 460. It does look like it is depleting here. I don't know if what the reason is, why it's going up or down, but maybe it's more closely to 450 possibly. If we look at the reactor, is there a way for us to see? So it says generation is 500,000, and I don't know, maybe it's because we're not utilizing it, but let's just assume that 500K is the max that it can actually produce. And the reason why it may not be generating all the way is because the uraninite right here is not all the way at maximum. I don't know why, but it's not all the way at maximum. But yes, we do want to turn on the auto mode because we want this to be able to shut off when the internal buffer goes off. It's very much like the setup that I did for my reactors down here, except that is a single switch, whereas this I had to do it externally, basically detecting if the power buffer is below 80%, and if it is, it'll kick on. If it goes above that, then it'll shut off. And so now if I was to have basically 3 of these on each platform with it producing 500,000, well, that's 12 reactors, and that will produce about 6 million FE per tick. That is a lot of power. But to do this, I'm going to need roughly 396 of these reactors. So yes, I'm going to need a bit more uraninite to be built up before we can do this. So now, because we need a lot of this uraninite essence, how about we kind of maximize this machine and take these upgrades and upgrade them to what this machine technically should max out at. Now, as far as what is the max speed you can do, according to some nice fine folk over on the All the Mods Discord, it does appear like they have done some significant testing, and it seems like we should be able to use these thermal energy upgrades or augments in combination with the thermal energy components. And what's interesting is you may think that the Twinite is a bit better, but I think the sheer processing speed that this will now run at once we get this set up, it just completely throws everything out the window that we know about the way upgrades work. Now, these upgrades do not come without a cost, of course. They do require some clay. There's also some Stella ingots that we're going to need to make, and these require netherite and also nether stars in order to make, which we have all of those things in place. But we also need the Melodium ingots. These are also not too bad, just requiring some gold, but chorus flower, which is something that we actually need for that. And then it just continues on. And here, by the way, is the Draconic Integral Component. That is what we had at the start of this pack before this mod was actually added. And these are actually not too bad either. However, they do require Dragon's Breath to make. So producing these in the grand scheme of things is not too bad, but making all of the patterns for everything, whew, yeah, that's where things get a bit rough. So let's go ahead and test this out ourselves. So I've got these all crafted up now, which did take a little bit of time, but it's going to be a lot faster once we upgrade all of our machines to this. So Stellar Integral Component, we have 1 Efficiency Nullifier Augment and 2 Energy Nullifier Augments. And apparently this is supposed to really make this thing go. So as of right now, we can see this is what this is at this current speed. But as soon as I replace this, it's going to have a significant power cost, but it is now going incredibly fast. Wow. So yes, that is producing a ton of resources incredibly quickly, way faster than I think I'll ever need. And you can just see the sheer rate that this is going. Yeah, very, very quick. And now to take a look at how much power this actually consumes to run. And you know what? It's actually not that bad. 816 RF per tick to get this operation speed. So now after upgrading these machines, they now run insanely fast as well. And something to note, do not get these mixed up, because notice the efficiency over here, which is kind of important. If I was to, for example, put 2 of these efficiency nullifiers in here with one of these, you notice we're only at 98%, and look how much power it costs now to run. And if I put this here in the correct way with 2 energy nullifiers and 1 efficiency, we get 267, which by the way makes this multi-servo press work instantaneously. So if I was to, for example, request like a Stella, like a couple of Stellas right here, this, you'll be able to see how fast this operation is. But not only that, these are happening like as soon as the thing goes in. We don't even see the process show up on the bar. It's just doing the operation immediately. And this, by the way, is incredibly fast because this has a very slow processing speed typically. And so this is incredibly broken. But that's the whole power of thermal. And that's why I've kind of been like pushing to do the Phytos, because of how insanely fast the Phytos can get with these upgraded mods in here. And so as you can see, with all of the need for power, producing about needing about 800 RF per tick, almost 1,000 per tick for each one of those phytogens, yeah, we're gonna need a lot of power. Of course, we're gonna need it for antimatter as well, but in this particular case, now I should be able to craft up more of these reactors and get that 6 million that I'm actually looking for. Now, when setting these up, I wonder, can I do 2 at once? I've never actually tried. Oh my god, it does. Yes, we can do 2 at once. So I guess we could technically place all of these down, and I don't know if we have to be near them. Probably not, but there we go. So this is what it's going to look like to have at least 3 of these running. And of course, you could just make as many of these as you want and just simply tap in with this export bus and just do the exact same thing. Now, in crafting up all of those nitros, I've realized that my infrastructure for actually crafting things is just not up to par. So there's a thing I can probably do to fix that, and that's by making 256K storages. But that also comes with another problem that I'm facing. I just can't craft up these logic circuits fast enough. So I think this would be a good time to also, since we're in the process of speeding everything up, go ahead and exchange these out for a much faster solution. And this should be sped up by using these extended Inscribers. And I'm going to need about 20 of them, which is quite a bit in order to make. It is going to require a little bit of work here, but the idea is that we can have 4 Inscribers on each side of our pattern provider. And these Inscribers can also do 4 operations at a time. And so in theory, this should speed up our operation speed by 16 times, allowing us to do 16 processes at once. And then also to speed things up, I've went ahead and added 4 more of these co-processing units onto our co-processing stack. And then I'm also going to be upgrading these storages once we have this up and running. But the co-processing unit, the reason I want to add those is because the molecular assemblers here can support up to 8 crafting operations at once. And so we need at least 7 of these co-processing units to extend that functionality, because innately these can already send to 1. So having this set up like this, we should be able to send multiple recipes into this, so long as we have enough CPUs. At least that's how I understand it. I could be absolutely wrong here. Maybe you can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Now, we're also going to need more of these presses, but we're also going to need to modify our recipes here for each one of these. So to be able to do that quickly and easily, believe it or not, there's also another item added from Extended AE that lets us do this, and that is called the pattern modifier. So this is useful for many different reasons, but for one, we can go in here and we can put all of our individual recipes that we've already set up, right? And we can start to add different things to them. For example, this is multiply by 2, and so now we have a 4 times setup, which is exactly what we would need in order to technically set this operation up for these new Inscribers. And what else is wild is in this pack, we can make a universal press, which will make this whole operation a whole lot smoother because we can just duplicate universal presses for everything. And to be able to duplicate these presses once we have them made, for example, the universal press, it's just as simple as putting a block of iron in here to produce those presses. So let's go ahead and start placing all of these different setups in. So I'm going to be placing my Inscribers directly on the back, just like this, on this entire array. Now, the one thing that I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to go into these pattern providers first, though, and I need to set a couple of parameters. And so this is where blocking mode really comes into play. And it says, do not push crafting ingredients in inventory if it contains a pattern input. So if we've already sent into one, this allows it to wrap to any other machine that is connected to it. Supposedly, this is really what this is ultimately made for. And so in this particular case, that should allow us to evenly distribute all of our individual recipes into all of these. Now, in this sort of setup, right, if we were to request, maybe I want to upgrade all of our patterns from 4 up into 16, because that would make sense, right? It would make sure it utilizes all of these inscribers in one go. But for right now, I'm going to test out the 4 and see if I can't get this to work. And if my whole logic behind all of this is correct, it should function. We're also going to need to make sure we place in our patterns, otherwise we won't be able to access the sides. So now it's time to configure the inside of these, and this is where things can get a little bit confusing. Now, we do need to make sure that all of these machines are set up to auto export. That is definitely going to be important. All of these need to be set up to do that. Otherwise, this whole crafting operation is not going to work. Now, some other things to note: you can change this to stack mode, but I recommend leaving it to 1 with the way this auto crafting is going to work. So that way we make sure that we round robin, basically we send to all these machines all of our crafting operations. So the way we can do 4 at a time. That's at least the goal. So the next part is putting the inscribers in, because that is also kind of a tedious operation. We're going to have to put these universal presses in each one of these slots, and there are 4 of them. So you see next inscribing job, and it essentially works like 4 inscribers in 1. It's exactly what it is. And so we're going to need to make sure we have 4 universal presses in each one of these machines. And look, inside the machine, you can even see them set up. So then for the fun part is placing in our acceleration cards. This is where having a network tool is going to be very handy in getting all of these in here. And so, yes, it is a tedious process, but this is going to make this insanely fast. I guess just to get a little taste of how fast this is, let's go ahead and request some of these. Notice it's going to do the press. And so that's already done. That is so fast. Okay, and there's all of the acceleration cards almost instantaneously done. So let's go ahead and do a 256K storage unit. Let's do like 4 of them now. And so whenever I request this, it should send all of these presses. Yes, and you can see them working simultaneously together. And that is what I want. And it's going to do 4 at a time for each operation. Oh, that's so good. I'm not joking. That was so fast that ended up processing those like instantaneous almost. Wow. Okay. And this is going to allow me to replace these crafters right here, which were 4Ks, by the way. Now they're going to be set up with 256Ks, which can store a ton more data and should allow us to essentially craft higher tier crafts. For example, like the nitros that have so much data that needs to be handled. So let's try this. For example, we're going to need like 324 more of these. So 324. And so now I have CPUs. So there we go. And I can start this craft. I do have to deal with that replanning thing. Eventually that will change. But now this thing should fly through this crafting operation. I think the only thing really holding it back is just simply crafting up all of the nitro crystals, the blazing crystals, and so on and so forth. Everything else is happening very quickly. And now this bad boy is almost done crafting. You can see how fast it actually crafts whenever it's finished. But there's a lot. That took like, I don't know, 20 minutes to craft. It was still a lot, simply because of this setup right here. I mean, it is fast, but whenever you're crafting that many individual items, whew, it is a lot. But it may have been faster too if I was crafting, for example, blocks at a time or compressed blocks at a time. In that case, we would just simply need to scale up the amount of power that is going into the orb. But for right now, that works just fine. And speaking of power, we're about to have an unlimited amount of it, or at least it's going to feel like that. 6 million is a lot of power. It really is. And it's going to feel like a lot of power as well whenever we start to send most of it to that SPS. And here's where I'm going to get to test all of this stuff. How many of these can we have going at once? Like, can I have those going there and then this going here? Oh my goodness, I can. Just so many of them all being placed at once. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. It looks like it takes all of them out of your inventory that would be needed for this to place it all down. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, and there they are. All of them up and running in their glory. Now I just need to attach some wireless controllers to each one of these segments and get them all connected up with these ingredients right here. And so now with all of these up and running and their entire buffers completely filled with items, looking fantastic by the way, we now need to get the power out. And I was thinking, how do we get the power out of here? Because right now these sides, I was thinking will get the power out, but I think it actually has to be connected to this little bottom node with the little red dot not actually being the part that we actually need to connect to. So how exactly is that going to work? Well, it might be that this just isn't connected to a network, but that's not the case either. Okay, so I'm going to have to place this on an actual node. So, that kind of changed a whole bunch, right? Now I'm going to need significantly more plugs, but I am going to need a plug, for example, on each one of these reactors. And now instead of hand doing all of these plugs and manually going into here and configuring this whole thing and so on and so forth, well, I can actually set one, shift right click with a flux configurator, and then I can place all of these down just like this, and then right click them, and that will paste the settings from this one into here. And now later on, we're going to have the ability to store all of this power. I really want to get into Draconic Evolution, and I want a giant, basically battery going right here. And that means we're going to end up changing the way that our current network works. But for right now, we don't have to worry about that too much. But keep in mind that the reason I'm setting up these flux networks is because it makes it super easy to do that down the road when we go to divide our networks up into two separate networks. And so having these channels available to us is going to make that very, very nice. And now with all of this power, let's see how much power overall we're actually generating. And there is a way we can do this. So we can actually set this priority to 1, meaning it's going to overtake everything in our base that is generating power. And then I can bypass the limit, and I can now see after all of the buffers run out, we should be able to see how much actual power we are producing. As you can see right here, 24 million is how much we're actively sending within the buffers, but it's going to be way less than that once all of the buffers are drained. And there you go. So we're producing like 6 million. And then also our other machines, I think, are still consuming power. These down here, these reactors, look super minuscule, but these should be producing 165,000 each, which should start really bringing up that rate. But yes, we're not producing a whole lot from those, definitely compared to the 6 million that's going here. You can see that 200,000 right here. So 6 million between all of these is a ton of power and the actual goal that I was going after. So now that that's done, I definitely want to break that because I don't want to be voiding our power. I will just want to use it. And the cool part about all of these is they will auto shut off, conserving all of the materials that are inside, and they won't run until we actually need that. Speaking of needing power, I think that's where next episode is really going to get kind of crazy, because that's when we're going to dive into the SPS, otherwise known as the supercritical phase shifter, and this will allow us to produce some antimatter. But outside of that, we're going to start focusing on going through the progression and getting ourselves a giant energy ball in the middle of our base. And that means we're going to be grinding our way through Draconic Evolution soon. And even though there's nothing from Draconic Evolution required in the ATM star at this current moment, I do expect it to probably get added in the future. But for now, we're still on the grind for that All the Mod star, and we are going to achieve it. We are actually very, very close to achieving it, believe it or not. And so with that, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and hopefully you learned something new, whether that was through the power reactors, or if that was through the extended AE mod that we definitely dived into a little bit. So I hope you enjoyed. I thank you so much. Be sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already. And of course, give this video a huge thumbs up. And with that, guys, it's now time for me to thank the amazing supporter of today's episode. That amazing thanks is going to go out to Anonymous. Thank you so much for your amazing support, by the way, for choosing to support me over on the Discord by becoming a Discord premium member and supporting in one of the best ways possible. I thank you all so very much, of course, for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one, or down in the comment section below, or even over on Twitch, which I do live stream basically 3 days a week. And so I would love to catch you over there. And well, guys, of course, as always, thanks for watching. Bye!